It started with a smile. A perfect, camera-ready smile. The kind Meghan Markle had mastered long before she ever became a duchess. But beneath that polished grin, at Fortune's most powerful women's summit in Washington, D.C., something was boiling. Something that no publicist, no stylist, and no royal title could disguise. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because this time, the stage didn't belong to her. And when the woman across from her, Fortune's editor-in-chief, Alyson Shontell, greeted her with a calm, neutral tone, saying simply, "Welcome, Meghan," the air in the room shifted. Did you catch that? No, Your Royal Highness. No, Duchess of Sussex. Just Meghan. And that's where it all began. A pause. A flicker of discomfort. A momentary twitch in Meghan's jaw, too subtle for most, but not for those who've watched her long enough to know that behind every polished answer lies a storm waiting to erupt. The cameras kept rolling. The audience kept smiling. And Alyson, composed, confident, professional, didn't flinch. But inside Meghan, something cracked. She had spent years fighting to hold on to that title, to prove she was more than just another celebrity. She wanted to be recognized. Not as Meghan, the actress. Not as Meghan, the activist. But as Meghan, the Duchess. Yet here, on a stage built for women who earned their power through leadership and grit, not lineage or marriage, that crown suddenly meant nothing. And Meghan knew it. This wasn't the royal court of Windsor. This was Fortune, a world where titles didn't intimidate and status didn't impress. A world that treated her like every other guest. And to Meghan Markle, that was unforgivable. The irony was painful. The most powerful women's summit was supposed to be her victory lap, her moment to shine on her own terms. A redemption arc after years of media backlash. An elegant comeback. Her team had planned every detail. The lighting, the camera angles, the talking points about authentic leadership and women supporting women. Even the pauses between applause lines. It was supposed to be perfect. But perfection, as Meghan was about to learn, has a way of unraveling when control slips away. Alyson Shontell didn't follow the script. She didn't offer royal pleasantries or inflated reverence. She treated Meghan like what she technically was, a public figure invited to speak, not a monarch gracing the stage. And that subtle decision, that one-word choice, shattered the illusion. Let's rewind for a second. Why was Meghan even at Fortune's summit? This wasn't a red carpet or a Netflix special. It was a room full of CEOs, changemakers, and innovators, people who built empires, not married into them. Yet Meghan's name had power. Controversial, polarizing, but undeniably magnetic. And for Fortune, booking her meant headlines. For Meghan, it meant validation. A chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with real, power women and prove she belonged. But belonging, as she would discover, requires more than titles. It demands authenticity. And that's the one currency Meghan's critics claim she's run out of. So when Alyson welcomed her without royal formality, the subtext was clear. Here, you're not a duchess. You're just Meghan. And that truth, as simple as it sounded, landed like a blow. You could feel the tension radiate through the room. Invisible, yet suffocating. Meghan's smile tightened. Her posture straightened. Her tone, just a little sharper than before. But the real story wasn't in what she said next. It was in how she said it. The polite mask of calm professionalism couldn't fully hide the rising irritation. And that's when the cameras caught it. The subtle narrowing of her eyes, the practiced charm slipping for just a second. Some in the audience exchanged looks. Others leaned in. Because everyone sensed it, something was off. It wasn't the typical glossy PR performance. This was personal. Alyson, on the other hand, remained steady, effortlessly professional. She wasn't rude. She wasn't condescending. She was simply equal. And that's what made it worse. Because Meghan didn't want equality that day. She wanted recognition, acknowledgement, reverence. And when she didn't get it, the mask started to fracture. Let's be honest. Meghan's relationship with titles has always been complicated. From the moment she joined the royal family, she wore that duchess hood like armor, a badge of validation, a shield against criticism. But when she stepped away from royal duties, something changed. Her public identity fractured. Was she a Hollywood star again? A humanitarian? A global speaker? She tried to be all three, but each role came with contradictions. She spoke about humility, yet demanded prestige. She championed equality, yet bristled when not addressed as Duchess. She preached authenticity, yet performed perfection. And now, on this fortune stage, all those contradictions collided. Alyson's simple greeting wasn't just an introduction, it was a mirror, a reflection Meghan couldn't control, and what she saw staring back shook her. The interview began innocently enough. Soft questions about empowerment, motherhood, and the challenges of public life. Meghan answered gracefully, rehearsed but composed. The audience nodded. Cameras clicked. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Every time Alyson said Meghan, it was like a quiet reminder, a stripping away of hierarchy. And Meghan's composure began to slip. Her tone sharpened. Her hands fidgeted. Her responses turned slightly defensive. Then came the breaking point. Alyson referred to her again, gently, as Meghan. And this time, Meghan interrupted. Actually, she said, voice tight but polite, it's Duchess of Sussex. The room froze. You could feel it. That collective inhale from the audience, the electric silence that follows a boundary being crossed. Alyson blinked once. No visible reaction. Then, with quiet authority, she said, of course, Meghan. And just like that, the air shattered. From that moment, it wasn't an interview anymore. It was a power struggle. Meghan versus the mirror. Title versus truth. Ego versus equality. And while the cameras captured smiles, the tension was undeniable. Alyson carried on professionally, guiding the conversation with ease. But Meghan, flustered, visibly agitated, began losing her rhythm. She stumbled over words she'd rehearsed countless times. Her signature charm felt forced, brittle. Even her laughter sounded strained. The crowd picked up on it. They shifted in their seats. The energy in the room wasn't admiration anymore. It was curiosity tinged with discomfort. Because everyone sensed the imbalance. The woman who'd once controlled every narrative was now being quietly outmaneuvered by calm simplicity. And the irony? The event's theme was authentic power. Backstage, whispers started to spread. Even Meghan's PR staff exchanged anxious glances. This wasn't going according to plan. The social media team, ready with pre-cut inspirational clips, suddenly hesitated. The energy was wrong, and Meghan could feel it. The harder she tried to regain control, the more the moment slipped away. Her smile turned mechanical. Her tone defensive. Her answers, longer and less coherent. She wasn't speaking. She was performing survival. Because the woman who built her public empire on poise and control was losing both, live, on stage. And yet, what made this moment so haunting wasn't the confrontation itself. It was what it symbolized. It was Meghan Markle, stripped of the one thing she clung to most, validation through title. Alyson's refusal wasn't hostility. It was equality. And equality, ironically, felt like disrespect to someone used to royal treatment. That's the paradox, isn't it? The very movement Meghan claimed to lead, empowerment, equality, authenticity, is the same one that now challenges her identity. And as the event went on, that paradox grew louder. By the time the interview wrapped, the damage was done. Applause filled the hall, but it was hesitant, polite, not passionate. Alyson thanked her graciously. Meghan smiled for the cameras. But inside, everyone knew. Something had gone terribly wrong. Because this wasn't just an awkward exchange. It was a turning point. The moment the Duchess lost control of the narrative, again. And the world was watching. But what happened next, after the lights dimmed and the applause faded, would make this fortune fiasco spiral into something far bigger than anyone expected. Because as Meghan stormed off stage, furious and humiliated, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just about a title anymore. It was about power. And who really had it? It began with silence. A silence so thick it wrapped around the entire ballroom like a fog. After the interview ended, the applause, forced, uncertain, died quickly. The room, moments ago full of polite admiration, felt cold. You could almost hear the hum of whispers weaving through the tables. What just happened? Did she just correct the editor? Why was she so tense? That's how Chapter 1 begins, the calm before the storm. Because before the public meltdown, before the trending hashtags, and before the palace's icy silence, there was that moment of quiet disbelief. The kind that always comes before chaos. Meghan didn't walk off stage immediately. She stood there for a second, plastering on her most professional grin while photographers called out her name. But her eyes, sharp, restless, were already searching. For her team. For control. For a way to spin what had just happened. Alyson Shontell, on the other hand, was calm as ever. She smiled at Meghan, nodded politely, and turned to shake hands with one of the event organizers. No visible discomfort. No apology. Just composure. And that calm, that effortless normalcy, made it worse. Because for Meghan, this wasn't just another interview. It was a carefully curated opportunity to reassert her brand. The humanitarian Duchess, the modern royal, the global inspiration. But Alyson's refusal to play along had exposed something she couldn't hide. Fragility beneath the polish. Let's rewind about 24 hours. The night before the summit, Meghan's team had been in overdrive. They'd rehearsed every answer, every transition. They'd analyzed Alyson's previous interviews, looking for potential angles that might flatter Meghan's narrative. Even the wardrobe choice was strategic, an off-white outfit, tailored and powerful, meant to project both humility and dominance. Her stylist reportedly said, "You'll look like the embodiment of leadership." And that's exactly what Meghan wanted, to look like she belonged. But behind the scenes, there was tension. Staff members whispered about her nerves. One even joked, quietly, that Meghan rehearsed her smile more than her talking points. She'd spent the past few weeks under increasing scrutiny. Tabloids had been brutal. Her podcast had been criticized as self-serving. Netflix numbers weren't matching expectations. And worst of all, whispers about her relevance had started to grow louder. So this Fortune Summit wasn't just another public event. It was Redemption Day. The morning of the summit, the Washington, D.C. air was crisp. Paparazzi lined the hotel entrance as luxury SUVs rolled up. Inside, high-profile women mingled, CEOs, senators, innovators. Meghan arrived late. Her team claimed it was for security reasons, but insiders said it was timing. Meghan didn't like waiting backstage. She liked arriving last. When she entered, cameras snapped instantly. The crowd noticed. Heads turned. The energy shifted. Part awe, part curiosity. Here she was, the woman who left the palace to build her own empire. But not everyone was impressed. Because among this crowd of fortune women, titles didn't command respect. Achievement did. And Meghan, for all her fame, was seen as something different, a brand, not a builder. Still, she smiled and waved, every movement rehearsed, every glance intentional. She was ready to reclaim her spotlight. Or so she thought. Backstage, Alyson Shontell waited with her notes. She'd interviewed heads of state, business moguls, and cultural icons. To her, Meghan was just another guest, important, yes, but not untouchable. Alyson wasn't one for theatrics. She believed in honest dialogue, not flattery. And that's why her team had specifically instructed. Address her as Meghan Markle. Keep it neutral. It wasn't meant as disrespect, it was policy. Fortune didn't use titles. Not president, not dame, not sir. Just names. But Meghan's staff had a different expectation. They'd sent an email earlier that morning requesting the formal introduction. Please address her as Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex. The Fortune staff politely declined. And that's where the trouble began. When Meghan took her seat on stage, she didn't know the email had been ignored. She expected the royal introduction. Her body language showed it. Chin lifted slightly, hands folded elegantly on her lap. But Alyson didn't indulge it. Please welcome Meghan Markle. That was it. Simple, direct, equal. And you could see the change instantly. Meghan's smile froze mid-air, her posture stiffened. It was a small moment, but it detonated everything that came next. The audience noticed too. A few raised eyebrows. A flicker of tension in the room. But Alyson didn't waver. She opened with a professional, almost gentle question. You've spoken a lot about redefining power. How has your understanding of leadership evolved? Perfectly neutral. Perfectly fair. But Meghan's answer was anything but. She started well, talking about women's empowerment, motherhood, and the importance of compassion. But there was an edge in her tone. Something performative. Defensive. She used words like, my journey, my platform, my global influence. And every time she said my, the audience felt the disconnect grow wider. This wasn't a conversation, it was a monologue. Alyson kept her composure, nodding politely. But you could sense her curiosity. Was Meghan listening? Or was she just performing? Halfway through the talk, Alyson interjected lightly. addressing her again by name. Meghan, you mentioned authenticity earlier. And that's when the mask cracked. Meghan interrupted mid-sentence. It's Duchess of Sussex, actually. The words were sharp. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the air. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Alyson blinked. Just once. Then smiled. Of course, she said simply. And continued. Meghan. It was subtle. Effortless. Brilliant. The calm professionalism of that response disarmed everyone. It made Meghan's correction look petty, imperial even, in a room full of women who'd built their own names without titles. And that's when the energy shifted. From that point on, nothing went smoothly. Every answer Meghan gave felt tense, strained. Every smile forced. At one point, when Alyson gently asked about balancing private struggles with public roles, Meghan's jaw tightened again. Her voice, usually soft and measured, grew clipped. She launched into a long-winded explanation about choosing to lead with empathy, but it came off defensive, almost accusatory, like the world owed her understanding. And the audience, mostly executives and leaders, didn't buy it. Their applause was polite, not enthusiastic. By the end of the talk, the warmth had evaporated completely. But what happened after the event was even more telling. Witnesses said Meghan left the stage abruptly, refusing post-interview photos with Alyson. Her team huddled around her like a storm cloud. And from inside that huddle, one thing was clear. She was furious. A staff member overheard her snapping. She knew exactly what she was doing. That was disrespectful. Another claimed Meghan called the situation a setup. Whether true or exaggerated, the narrative was forming, and fast. Because in the world of Meghan Markle, perception is everything. And perception, at that moment, was spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, Alyson went back to her duties, calm, unfazed, even gracious. She thanked the audience. She thanked the organizers. She carried on. No statement. No drama. Just quiet professionalism. And that silence spoke volumes. Because within hours, Twitter exploded. Clips from the interview circulated under hashtags like #DuchessDrama and #FortuneSummit. Some defended Meghan. Others mocked her. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. Something about that exchange felt revealing. It wasn't just a title correction. It was a glimpse into the tension between image and identity. By nightfall, the story had gone global. Meghan Markle snaps at editor during Fortune Summit. Duchess demands title live on stage. Power Summit turns awkward. And while Meghan's camp tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, the damage was already done. Because in the eyes of millions, that single word, Meghan, had stripped away everything she'd built her new brand around. Yet, if she thought the fallout would end there, she was wrong. Because the next day, something unexpected happened, something that would make this story explode far beyond DC. A behind-the-scenes clip surfaced online. A brief, blurry moment caught by an audience member's phone. And in that clip, Meghan's expression, her muttered words off mic, her tone, everything, would tell a very different story from the one her PR team tried to spin. And that's where the real storm began. Because what that clip revealed would change how the world saw her, forever. It started as a whisper, a faint buzz through the digital airwaves, a clip, barely 30 seconds long, recorded by an attendee sitting halfway back in the audience. But within hours, that whisper turned into a roar. By sunrise, it was everywhere. Chapter 2. The Fortune Summit Dynamic. Imagine this, a dimly lit auditorium filled with some of the most powerful women in the world. Executives, politicians, innovators, women who'd built their empires not from titles or crowns, but from blood, sweat, and unrelenting persistence. And at the center of it all, a duchess trying to prove she still mattered. The Fortune Summit wasn't just another celebrity event. It was an arena of merit. You don't get applause there for who you marry, only for what you build. And that's what made Meghan's presence so complicated. Because she wasn't one of them. Not really. Not yet. The clip that went viral didn't show much. No shouting, no chaos. Just a brief, uncomfortable moment. Alyson Shontell saying, "Thank you, Meghan." And Meghan, visibly stiff, replying through a thin smile, "It's Duchess of Sussex." The room quiet. Alyson's polite nod. Then, the faintest audible sigh from the audience. That was it. But that's all the internet needed. Within minutes, social media turned the moment into a storm. Comments flooded in. She's obsessed with her title. This is why people don't take her seriously. She should have just let it go. Others defended her. Respect her title. She earned it. She's constantly disrespected by the media. It was a full-blown cultural debate, all triggered by 2 words. But to understand why the reaction was so intense, you have to understand the room. The Fortune Summit isn't your average panel talk. It's a gathering of women who define influence through impact, not image. Picture the front row. Indra Nooyi, former PepsiCo CEO. Ginny Rometty, former IBM chair. Melinda French Gates, philanthropist. These are women who've faced sexism, boardroom wars, global crises, and still built legacies that last. In that context, Meghan's insistence on being called Duchess hit differently. Because in this room, nobody cared about lineage. Only legacy. Now, let's zoom in on that stage again. The lights were bright, almost blinding. 2 chairs, center stage. A sleek black backdrop with the Fortune logo glowing behind them. And between them, the space where power dynamics silently collided. Alyson sat straight, calm, her notepad balanced effortlessly on her knee. She wasn't there to flatter. She was there to listen, to challenge. Meghan, by contrast, was poised yet restless. She kept adjusting her hands, brushing invisible lint from her outfit, repositioning her microphone. Her smile was tight, the kind you wear when you're trying too hard to look relaxed. It wasn't arrogance. It was insecurity wrapped in elegance. From the moment Alyson said Meghan, there was a ripple in the crowd. Some smiled, some whispered, and Meghan heard it. She always heard it. She prided herself on reading rooms, on controlling narratives. But this room was different. This wasn't Hollywood. This was the world of women who didn't need approval. And that terrified her. Behind the scenes, her team felt it too. They watched from the wings, tense, anxious. Her publicist's hand hovered over her phone, ready to issue a statement if things got messy. The assistant producer whispered to another staffer, "Is she okay?" Because Meghan's face, perfectly composed on the outside, told a different story up close. A flicker of irritation here, a clench of the jaw there. She wasn't losing her cool yet, but she was losing her grip. Meanwhile, Alyson pressed on with the interview, gliding through topics: leadership, equality, resilience. Every question aimed to reveal something real, something raw. But Meghan's answers, they weren't landing. They were polished, curated, rehearsed. The same sound bites she'd used at conferences before. Phrases like amplifying voices, breaking barriers, leading with compassion. Beautiful words, empty of depth. Alyson nodded, but didn't indulge. She followed up with sharper questions. "You've spoken about authenticity. What does that mean when public perception doesn't match your message?" Ouch. It was a fair question, but it stung. Because Meghan had spent years trying to align her brand with authenticity, and yet, her image had become one of calculation. Her pause said everything. A brief hesitation, then a practiced smile. "Well," she began, "authenticity is about staying true to who you are, regardless of what others say." A decent answer, but even she knew it rang hollow. The irony? That clip, the one that went viral, cut off right before that line. So the world didn't hear her attempt to recover. They only saw the correction, the tension, the ego. And that's the danger of modern fame. The camera never forgives, and the internet never forgets. By the afternoon, the Fortune PR team was in crisis mode. They hadn't expected this level of chaos. They released a brief statement. "Fortune celebrates all women of influence. We're proud to have hosted a meaningful discussion about leadership and identity." It was diplomatic, non-committal, perfectly neutral. But the silence from Alyson herself spoke louder. She didn't tweet. She didn't post. She didn't need to. Her composure during the event had already told the world everything about who really owned that stage. The fallout inside Meghan's camp was immediate. Phone calls flew across time zones. Her manager demanded that Fortune clarify the misunderstanding. One aide suggested leaking a softer video clip to recast the moment in a better light. But the problem wasn't the clip, it was the contrast. Because while Alyson represented calm authority, Meghan radiated control anxiety. And the world could see it. Here's the cruel irony. The Fortune Summit was supposed to elevate Meghan. Instead, it exposed her. Every movement, every word, every reaction became evidence in the court of public opinion. And as more journalists replayed the footage, the narrative sharpened. Meghan can't stand being treated like everyone else. That headline alone was enough to reignite months of dormant controversy. The British press pounced. American commentators joined in. And the hashtag #CallMeDuchess began trending. Mocking, brutal, viral. Meanwhile, Fortune executives quietly debriefed. Alyson reportedly shrugged it off. She was fine, she said simply. Maybe just under pressure. But others in the organization noticed something else. That moment, the correction, revealed a cultural disconnect. One side driven by hierarchy and perception, the other by equality and achievement. It wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a clash of values. Still, Meghan refused to see it that way. In her mind, she'd been disrespected, humiliated in front of peers and press, and worse, undermined by someone who refused to acknowledge her title, her identity. That night, she reportedly called a close friend in tears. "They always find a way to diminish me," she said. Always. But what she didn't realize was that this wasn't about diminishing her. It was about redefining power. And for the first time, Meghan wasn't holding the upper hand. The Fortune Summit had done more than spark a viral moment. It had exposed the growing disconnect between Meghan's brand and Meghan's reality. And that reality, raw and unfiltered, was now spreading online like wildfire. But this was just the beginning. Because as the backlash grew louder, as the headlines sharpened, as the palace quietly took note, someone close to Alyson Shontell decided to speak out. And what that insider revealed about the interview planning, about what Fortune really thought of Meghan's request, would turn this PR storm into a full-blown media explosion. It's easy to look back at the viral clip and assume it was spontaneous, that Alyson simply forgot the title, or that she chose the casual Meghan out of convenience. But that's not the truth. Not even close. Because long before Meghan Markle set foot on that stage, Alyson Shontell had already made her decision. Quietly, firmly, and with intention. And it wasn't about disrespect. It was about principle. You see, Alyson wasn't the kind of journalist who got dazzled by fame. She wasn't one to bow to celebrity whims or inflated egos. Her entire career was built on cutting through facades, exposing the truth beneath glossy PR layers. She'd interviewed world leaders, billionaires, and innovators who changed the global landscape. People who commanded attention through intellect and grit, not status or titles. So when she received the pre-interview prep notes from Meghan's team, an exhaustive document filled with talking points, restricted questions, and protocol reminders, she didn't flinch. She read every line. Then, she looked at her assistant and said, "We don't use royal titles here. Not for anyone. Not even for her." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was matter of fact. Because in Alyson's world, integrity always outranked influence. The Fortune editorial policy was clear. No preferential treatment. No inflated labels. When Barack Obama spoke at the summit, they introduced him as Barack Obama, former U.S. president. When Queen Rania of Jordan appeared, she was addressed as Rania Al-Abdullah. Even Oprah, one of the few who could make an audience rise to its feet without a word, was simply Oprah Winfrey. That was the point. The summit wasn't about titles. It was about power earned, not inherited. So when Meghan's publicists sent that insistence, "Please refer to her as Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex," it went directly against everything Alyson and the Fortune team stood for. Alyson didn't need to argue. She just said no. Calmly. Definitively. And that quiet refusal would later ripple into one of the most talked-about moments in modern celebrity history. But Alyson wasn't naive. She knew exactly what was at stake. This wasn't some lightweight podcast guest. This was Meghan Markle, a global lightning rod, loved by millions, criticized by millions more. Every facial expression dissected, every sentence headline fodder. So Alyson did what seasoned editors do best. She prepared. She studied Meghan's interviews, from Oprah's Garden Special to the Archetypes podcast. She noted the recurring themes: empowerment, equality, victimhood, vindication. And she spotted the pattern, the careful choreography behind every word. In every conversation, Meghan controlled the narrative. She positioned herself as misunderstood, silenced, wronged, the underdog turned survivor. And Alyson? She respected that journey. She did. But she also saw the contradiction. How could someone preach authenticity yet demand scripted reverence? How could someone advocate for equality yet insist on royal treatment? That contradiction, Alyson decided, would not define her stage. In the days leading up to the event, Alyson's team debated how to handle it. Should we just call her Duchess to avoid drama? One junior producer asked. Alyson shook her head. If she's here to talk about empowerment, she doesn't need a title to prove it. And that was that. Decision made. Fast forward to the morning of the event. As Meghan's SUV pulled up, Alyson was reviewing her final notes. She wasn't nervous, just focused. She believed in her approach. Fair, balanced, human. When she greeted Meghan backstage, she extended a hand and smiled warmly. Good to see you, Meghan. Instantly, there was a flicker, a tiny, imperceptible pause. Meghan's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly, smiling back. Thank you for having me, she said, her tone controlled. It was polite, civil, but something unspoken hung between them, an awareness that the tone of this conversation would not be the one Meghan's team had rehearsed. Once they were on stage, Alyson's professionalism was textbook perfect. She spoke clearly, maintained composure, kept the discussion grounded. Even when Meghan corrected her, "It's Duchess of Sussex," Alyson didn't react. She didn't argue, didn't retreat, didn't indulge. She simply said, "Of course, Meghan," and moved on. That moment, barely 5 seconds long, was the essence of Alyson's quiet authority. She refused to let ego steer the dialogue. And yet, what made Alyson's stance even more powerful was how understated it was. She didn't need to challenge Meghan directly. She didn't roll her eyes or speak sharply. She just remained calm. And in doing so, she exposed something deeper than a royal temper. She revealed the fragility behind it. Because Meghan wasn't used to resistance delivered with grace. She was used to either adoration or aggression, not quiet equality. And equality, in that moment, felt like defiance. After the event, when the video clip exploded online, journalists tried to get Alyson to comment. She declined every request. No statement, she told her team. The work speaks for itself. And it did. In a single gesture, Alyson had embodied everything Fortune stood for: integrity, composure, and courage. She'd faced a global celebrity's subtle power play and won without ever raising her voice. But behind the scenes, not everyone was as composed. Meghan's camp was livid. Her team accused Fortune of disrespect, claiming the lack of formal title was inconsistent with proper protocol. One aide even threatened to reevaluate future collaborations. Alyson didn't respond. Fortune didn't apologize. They didn't need to. Because to them, the real insult wasn't Alyson's restraint. It was the entitlement that demanded otherwise. Ironically, the media's portrayal of Alyson after that day turned her into something she'd never sought to be: a quiet symbol of professional backbone. Headlines read, "Editor keeps cool as Duchess melts down." The woman who didn't bow. How Fortune's Alyson Shontell redefined respect. Every photo of her, calm, poised, unbothered, contrasted sharply with images of Meghan's tight smile and restless posture. And that contrast spoke volumes. But what the public didn't know was that Alyson had seen something coming even before the event. During a pre-interview conference call, one of Meghan's representatives had pressed her hard about language. "Please ensure you refer to her as Duchess. That's part of her identity." Alyson's reply was simple, but firm. "She's here as a woman of influence." That's enough. That sentence, just 6 words, perfectly encapsulated her stance. Because in a world obsessed with image, Alyson represented a rare kind of authenticity: respect without worship, equality without exception. In the aftermath, Fortune staff quietly admired her resolve. Some said it was one of the most quietly powerful moments they'd witnessed. Others admitted it sparked internal reflection about how easily celebrity status can distort true empowerment. And for Alyson, that was victory enough. She didn't need headlines. She didn't need validation. Her silence was her statement. But as Alyson moved on, the same couldn't be said for Meghan. Because while Alyson's calm silence elevated her, Meghan's reaction dug her deeper into the pit of public scrutiny. And soon, new leaks, messages, notes, whispers from insiders would reveal that what Meghan called a misunderstanding was actually a battle that began days before the interview ever took place. A battle she thought she'd already won. But what came next would prove she was fighting the wrong war all along. It's easy to see the outburst, the correction, the tension, the barely hidden fury, and assume it was arrogance. But what if it wasn't? What if that moment, when Meghan demanded to be called Duchess, wasn't about superiority at all, but survival? Because behind the glamour, the curated speeches, and the confident walk across that Fortune Summit stage, Meghan Markle was fighting a quiet, brutal war with herself. And this time, the enemy wasn't the media. It wasn't the palace. It wasn't even Alyson Shontell. It was her reflection. The thing about fame is that it never leaves you whole. It takes, it chips, it consumes. And Meghan, more than anyone, knew what it felt like to lose pieces of herself. One headline, one rumor, one betrayal at a time. She'd been the bright, ambitious actress who made it to Suits, the humanitarian who captured hearts with compassion speeches, the American dream turned royal fairy tale. Then, in what felt like seconds, she became the villain of every tabloid. Every smile was dissected, every word weaponized, every silence reinterpreted. When she left the royal family, she told the world it was about freedom. But freedom, for Meghan, came with a price: identity. Because when she walked away from the palace, she walked away from the one thing she'd spent her life chasing: recognition. Back in Los Angeles, she tried to rebuild herself. A podcast, a documentary, public appearances, all designed to project strength, control, rebirth. But under the surface, she was haunted by one question she could never quite silence. Without the crown, who am I? She never said it out loud. She didn't have to. You could see it in the way she spoke, the way she over-explained, the way she defended her worth at every turn. She didn't want to be forgotten. She wanted to be understood. She wanted to be believed. But every time she tried to take control of her story, it slipped further away. The world didn't see her as a woman trying to heal. They saw her as a woman desperate to be seen. And that desperation, that constant need to prove she mattered, became her Achilles heel. So when she walked into Fortune's most powerful women's summit, it wasn't just another event. It was an exorcism. A chance to reclaim her voice, to show that she still belonged in rooms of influence, to prove she was one of them, powerful, independent, unstoppable. But the problem was, she didn't feel unstoppable anymore. The Netflix numbers weren't breaking records. The Spotify deal had fizzled. And public sympathy, once her armor, was wearing thin. Critics were circling. Fans were fading. And suddenly, the Duchess who once commanded royal headlines was being quietly replaced by new icons: Taylor Swift, Beyoncé, even Princess Kate's serene grace in contrast. Meghan needed a win. Desperately. And the Fortune stage was supposed to be it. But when Alyson greeted her without her title, without the validation she was craving, it hit something raw, something primal, something she thought she'd buried. That single moment wasn't just disrespect to Meghan. It was rejection, the thing she feared most. Because every part of her identity had been built around being seen. As a biracial actress breaking barriers. As a humanitarian redefining kindness. As a duchess rewriting what royalty meant. And yet, there she was, on a stage that didn't care about any of that. The Fortune women weren't impressed by fairy tales. They were impressed by results. And that's what terrified her. Inside Meghan's head, the moment unfolded like an echo of the past. Back to the Royal Garden interview with Oprah. Back to the headlines calling her difficult, demanding, divisive. Back to the quiet conversations behind palace doors, the ones that made her feel small. Back then, she'd promised herself, never again will I be dismissed. But now, sitting across from Alyson Shontell, calm, unbothered, treating her like an equal, Meghan felt dismissed all over again. And equality, in her mind, began to look like disrespect. Imagine living years of your life being introduced as Her Royal Highness. Every door opens. Every camera turns. Every room pauses when you enter. Then, suddenly, someone calls you just Meghan. Not Your Highness. Not Duchess. Just Meghan. For most people, it's nothing. For her, it was everything. Because to Meghan, her title wasn't just a name, it was armor. It protected her from judgment. It reminded her that she'd survived the palace walls. It validated her story. Take that away, and what was left? Just a woman with a microphone and a smile. One that, for the first time in years, didn't seem to be working. During the interview, Meghan's internal monologue was running wild. Keep calm. Don't let her see it. Smile. But every Meghan, Alyson uttered, chipped away at her control. She tried to focus on the questions: leadership, empowerment, identity, but her mind kept circling back to one thing. Why won't she call me Duchess? It sounds petty, maybe even ridiculous. But for Meghan, it wasn't about the word. It was about the respect that word symbolized. Alyson's refusal to use it didn't feel neutral. It felt personal. And that triggered the part of Meghan that had fought her entire life to be taken seriously. The child who felt like an outsider. The actress told she'd never be marketable. The woman the tabloids tore apart. She'd clawed her way up from invisibility. She wasn't about to be erased on stage by a journalist, not again. But that's the tragedy of it. In trying to hold on to control, she lost it. Because the audience didn't see a woman protecting her dignity. They saw a woman correcting an interviewer. They didn't see fear. They saw ego. And once that perception formed, nothing she said afterward mattered. After the talk, Meghan went backstage. Cameras still flashing. Applause fading into the distance. Her team approached her, nervous smiles, awkward silence. One of them started, "You did great. That was really." "Don't," she cut in. Her voice low, controlled, cold. Then, after a pause, "She did that on purpose." Nobody answered. Because deep down, they knew Alyson hadn't done it to her. She'd done it for the principal. But in Meghan's mind, there was no difference. That night, back at her hotel suite, she reportedly replayed the clip, over and over, zooming in on her own reactions. The smile, the pause, the correction, the audience's silence. Every time she watched it, she saw something new, something she hated. Not Alyson's composure, not the audience's reaction, but her own expression. That flicker of anger, that loss of control, that glimpse of the version of herself she swore she'd buried. The one her critics always described. Entitled, defensive, ungrateful. And for Meghan, nothing was more painful than seeing her enemies proven right. That night, she didn't sleep. She paced. She drafted emails she never sent. She called a few trusted friends, one of them reportedly telling her, "Meg, you're reading too much into it. Let it go." But letting go wasn't something Meghan Markle did easily. Not when it came to image. Not when it came to respect. And certainly not when it came to control. Because to her, control was survival. She'd lost it before, during the royal years, when the press dictated her story. She wasn't about to lose it again. By morning, her team had a plan. They'd reach out to Fortune. They'd request that the video of the panel be edited. For clarity, they said. They'd reframe the narrative before it spun further. But it was already too late. The clip was viral. The headlines were ruthless. And the tide of opinion was shifting fast. Once again, Meghan found herself in a position she knew all too well. Outnumbered, outspun, and misunderstood. And this time, the damage wasn't just professional. It was personal. Because beneath the glitz, the speech rehearsals, and the PR machinery, she was exhausted. Exhausted from defending herself. Exhausted from explaining. Exhausted from always being at war with a world that refused to see her the way she saw herself. And yet, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Because somewhere in that same hotel, just a few floors down, a journalist from a major outlet had just received an anonymous tip. A tip from someone inside the Fortune staff. Someone who'd seen everything. The emails, the prep notes, the rehearsals. And that insider was about to leak a story that would twist the knife even deeper. One that would prove Meghan's confrontation wasn't spontaneous at all. It was planned. It didn't happen in a scream. It didn't happen in a storm of chaos or fury. It happened in a whisper, a soft, deliberate correction that hit harder than any outburst ever could. "Actually," Meghan said, her voice measured but sharp enough to slice through the air. "It's Duchess of Sussex." And just like that, silence. Not the polite, respectful silence of an audience listening. No. This was the kind of silence that breathes. The kind that pulses through the room like static, heavy, and electric. Everyone felt it. The tension, the disbelief, the shock that the supposedly most composed woman in the room had just snapped, even if she did it with a smile. Let's rewind those few crucial seconds. Alyson Shontell had just asked her a question about navigating public scrutiny as a modern woman of influence. A fair, neutral, even flattering question. She wasn't probing. She wasn't attacking. She was giving Meghan a perfect setup, a chance to inspire, to lead, to shine. But instead of focusing on the message, Meghan zeroed in on the delivery. Because Alyson had called her Meghan. And in that split second, the woman who had endured palace politics, British tabloid cruelty, and public judgment from millions, lost her grip on her composure. Not because of the question, but because of a name. Her name. It's strange, isn't it? How one word can unravel everything. How a single sound, a syllable too plain for royalty, can expose the most human insecurities. Because to everyone else in that room, Alyson's tone was respectful. But to Meghan, it was diminishing. It felt like being stripped. Not of dignity, but of validation. For years, Meghan had been fighting to define herself. First as an actress, then as a duchess, then as a woman outside the palace trying to keep her royal relevance alive in a world that had already moved on. That title, Duchess of Sussex, wasn't just a formality to her. It was her final tether to the life she sacrificed everything for. Her status, her story, her proof that she mattered in the grand, cruel machinery of global fame. So when Alyson chose not to use it, Meghan didn't hear equality. She heard erasure. The words came out too quickly to be calculated. It wasn't in the script. It wasn't in her media training notes. It was instinct, a defense mechanism. And the moment they escaped her lips, she realized it. You could see it in her eyes, that millisecond flash of regret. The kind that says, "Oh no, I can't take that back." But it was too late. The cameras caught it. The microphones picked it up. And the audience felt the sting. Even those who admired Meghan, who empathized with her struggles, couldn't ignore what they'd just witnessed, that she'd chosen a title over tone, hierarchy over humility. Alyson didn't flinch. That's what made it so devastating. She simply blinked once, smiled, calm, composed, unbothered, and said, "Of course, Meghan." And just like that, the room turned into a pressure cooker. Because everyone knew exactly what had just happened. This wasn't just a correction. It was a clash of worlds. One woman defined by achievement. The other defined by image. Both powerful, but in very different ways. And Alyson, with that simple, level-headed reply, had just won the exchange without ever raising her voice. In the audience, reactions rippled like shockwaves. Some gasped quietly. Others glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh, cringe, or stay still. Even the photographers hesitated, unsure whether to capture the tension or respect the discomfort. Meghan kept smiling, but her smile had changed. It was tighter now, thinner. Her shoulders, once relaxed, now drawn. She tried to regain rhythm, diving back into the question, her voice trembling just slightly on the edges. "Well," she said, forcing a small laugh, "it's not easy navigating public scrutiny as a woman, but I've always believed in rising above negativity." It was a decent recovery line, but the audience wasn't fully with her anymore. The emotional thread had been severed. Behind the curtain, Meghan's team felt the panic immediately. Her PR director leaned forward, whispering to an assistant, "Please tell me that wasn't caught on the main feed." The assistant just stared at the screen. It was. And that was the moment everyone backstage realized. This wasn't a simple faux pas. It was a moment. The kind of viral moment that can't be undone. Back on stage, Alyson pressed on, professional to the core. She asked follow-ups, transition topics, tried to steer the conversation back to the bigger picture. Women in leadership, authenticity, resilience. But Meghan's rhythm was gone. Every time Alyson said, "Meghan," it landed heavier. Each mention was like an echo of that first slip, the one Meghan couldn't undo. Her answers grew shorter, her tone sharper. The balance of power on stage had shifted completely. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another awkward celebrity interview. But to those who understood body language, PR professionals, psychologists, journalists, it was painfully revealing. Meghan wasn't just uncomfortable. She was crumbling. The subtle sighs, the fidgeting fingers, the overcompensating laughter. All classic tells of someone spiraling internally while trying to appear in control. And the cruel irony? This was happening at an event celebrating powerful women. Yet the only power visible in that moment belonged to Alyson Shontell. Halfway through the conversation, Meghan tried to regain control. She began speaking longer, using grand, emotional language. Words like empowerment, purpose, healing. But it sounded forced now. Even the cadence was different, too fast, too rehearsed. Alyson, meanwhile, barely spoke. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do in a confrontation is stay calm while the other person reveals themselves. Then came the final blow. As the interview neared its end, Alyson closed with what should have been a soft question. What advice would you give to young women watching today who want to step into their own power? It was a perfect chance for Meghan to redeem herself, to end strong, to remind everyone why she was there in the first place. But instead of taking it, she hesitated, visibly lost in her thoughts. Her eyes darted briefly toward the audience, as if searching for approval. Then she forced a laugh and said, "Titles don't define you. Your purpose does." It should have been inspiring, but the irony hung in the air like smoke. Even Alyson looked momentarily taken aback. You could almost feel her wanting to respond. Really? But she didn't. She just smiled. "Thank you, Meghan." And that was it. The final nail in the coffin. The applause that followed wasn't the warm, enthusiastic kind that echoes through a hall. It was polite, soft, obligatory. As Meghan stood and waved, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from frustration. Every camera flash felt like judgment. Every polite smile felt like mockery. And when she finally turned to exit the stage, she did it fast. Head high, stride sharp, but her jaw tight with anger. Alyson lingered behind for a moment, shaking hands with the fortune organizers, thanking them quietly. And someone in the audience whispered the line that would later go viral across Twitter and TikTok. She just dethroned the Duchess without even trying. Backstage, Meghan's team went into damage control mode. Phones out. Statements drafted. Clips reviewed. But Meghan? She didn't say a word. She just sat in the green room, staring blankly at her reflection in the mirror. That same reflection she'd spent years perfecting. And in that reflection, she didn't see the Duchess. She saw Meghan. Just Meghan. And for the first time, that name felt like a loss. But this was only the beginning. Because what she didn't know was that the confrontation hadn't ended on that stage. In the hours that followed, someone inside the Fortune organization was about to leak the truth, not just about the event, but about the behind-the-scenes chaos leading up to it. And that leak would turn an awkward exchange into an international scandal. The tension didn't leave with Meghan when she stepped off stage. It lingered, thick and electric, over the Fortune ballroom like a storm that refused to move on. You could feel it in the whispers, in the exchanged glances, in the half-hearted applause that died faster than it started. People didn't know what they had just witnessed. A misunderstanding? A power play? A glimpse behind the Duchess's perfect mask? Whatever it was, no one in that room would forget it. The audience was made up of some of the most influential women in the world: CEOs, journalists, political advisors, tech founders, thought leaders. The kind of people who've seen every type of personality on a stage: the nervous, the narcissistic, the natural-born leaders. But this was different. Because Meghan Markle wasn't supposed to crack. Her brand, the one meticulously curated through interviews, documentaries, and social initiatives, was built on grace under fire. She was supposed to embody strength, elegance, and unflappable confidence. Yet here she was, visibly shaken by something as simple as a name. And the audience could feel it. That perfect facade, the Hollywood smile, the poised body language, had faltered for a fraction of a second. But in that room, surrounded by women who made a living reading people, that fraction was all it took. In the front row, a high-profile CEO from Silicon Valley leaned toward her assistant and whispered, "She lost it." A journalist from the Washington Post scribbled something furiously into her notebook. An ambassador, stone-faced, muttered under her breath, "Insecure." Even those who sympathized with Meghan found themselves stunned. One attendee later said, "You could tell she wasn't expecting pushback. She came to be celebrated, not challenged." It was subtle, but the energy had shifted. And that shift was fatal. Because once an audience senses weakness in someone who's built their brand on empowerment, the illusion collapses. Meanwhile, back on stage, Alyson was still calm, still smiling, still professional. She didn't flinch, didn't gloat, didn't even acknowledge the elephant in the room. That composure only magnified the contrast. To the audience, it was clear. One woman was leading the conversation. The other was trying to control it, and failing. That distinction mattered. Because Fortune's audience respected quiet authority more than loud influence. And Alyson had just demonstrated both. As the session wrapped, Meghan tried to salvage it. She gave longer answers, smiled brighter, dropped lines like, "We're all just trying to lead with compassion." But her tone had changed. The charm felt rehearsed now, the laughter forced. The spontaneity, gone. Even the applause at the end sounded different. Not the warm, thunderous applause of admiration, but the light, dutiful clapping of an audience too polite to boo. In the world of public speaking, that's worse than silence. When the cameras cut, Meghan stood immediately. No post-talk mingling. No casual small talk with Alyson. Just a brisk nod, a tight smile, and a quick exit toward the wings. But the audience? They didn't move. They stayed seated, whispering, typing, tweeting. Because they'd just seen something rare. A public unraveling disguised as professionalism. And within minutes, it was no longer contained to that ballroom. Phones came out. Tweets were typed. Clips uploaded. Did Meghan just correct the host? She looks furious. That was so awkward. Hashtag Fortune Summit started trending before Meghan's motorcade even left the building. By the time her SUV hit the streets of Washington, D.C., the story had already gone global. Headlines were forming in real time. Duchess demands title at Fortune event. Meghan versus Fortune, the power clash. Royal manners or royal meltdown. The internet doesn't wait for facts. It feeds on moments. And Meghan had just given it one. A small moment with massive implications. Back inside the venue, the chatter was relentless. Some defended her. She's earned her title. They should have respected that. Others weren't as forgiving. She preaches equality but wants special treatment. It was cringeworthy. She just proved her critics right. It was fascinating, really, how divided the reactions were. Half the room saw a woman standing up for herself. The other half saw a woman unraveling under pressure. But even those who sympathized had to admit, Alyson Shontell had handled it like a master. One audience member put it perfectly in a viral tweet later that night. Alyson didn't just stay calm, she neutralized Meghan. It was power meeting poise. The ripple effect extended beyond the attendees. Fortune's PR team, caught completely off guard, scrambled to draft a statement. They weren't going to throw Meghan under the bus. She was still a high-profile guest, but they needed to protect the brand. The draft read, Fortune's most powerful women's summit celebrates diverse voices and respectful dialogue. We are grateful to both Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, and Alyson Shontell for an inspiring discussion on leadership. But even in its neutrality, the phrase Meghan, Duchess of Sussex stood out. Because that was the first, and only, time her title would be used that day. In a matter of hours, the moment had become a meme. Clips looped endlessly on TikTok. Commentators spliced the footage with slow zooms and dramatic sound effects. Meghan Markle demands royal respect at women's empowerment event, one caption read. Another mocked, the Duchess formerly known as humble. For Meghan, who tried so hard to move away from the royal narrative, it was devastating. Because no matter how much she spoke about purpose and compassion, the internet didn't care about her message. It only cared about the moment. And that moment, cold, clipped, and caught in 4K, told a story that drowned out everything else. But what made the fallout worse wasn't the internet's reaction. It was what was happening quietly behind the scenes. While Meghan's team was frantically coordinating with PR strategists, Alyson was receiving messages of support from journalists, executives, and even rival media houses. You handled that perfectly. Class act. You made every interviewer proud today. Alyson didn't respond to most of them. She didn't need to. Because she hadn't done it for attention. She'd simply done her job. And in doing so, she'd exposed something profound and painful about modern celebrity culture. That true power doesn't need to demand recognition. It earns it. Meanwhile, Meghan's car sped through D.C., windows tinted, her phone lighting up with notifications she couldn't bear to check. Her aide scrolled furiously beside her, muttering under her breath. It's everywhere already, she said quietly. Clips, headlines, memes. Meghan stared out the window. Her reflection flickered against the glass. Flawless, controlled, fragile. How bad is it? She asked. The aide hesitated, then whispered, It's not just trending, it's defining. Meghan didn't answer. She just sighed. That long, hollow sigh of someone realizing the damage isn't just external anymore. Because deep down, she knew what everyone else would realize soon enough. This wasn't about a name. It wasn't about a title. It was about image. And hers had just cracked in front of the very audience she was trying to impress. But the worst was yet to come. Because while Meghan's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, Fortune's staff began whispering among themselves. Someone had saved the pre-event emails. Someone had screenshots of Meghan's team's demands. Someone had receipts, proof that the misunderstanding had been brewing long before the cameras even rolled. And that someone was about to leak it. Not to tabloids, not to blogs, but to the Washington Post. And when those emails came out, the world would see that what happened on stage wasn't spontaneous at all. It was the tip of an iceberg Meghan had been building herself. The leak hit the newsroom like a spark in dry grass. The Washington Post's inbox pinged with an anonymous tip marked only with one word in the subject line: receipts. Inside were screenshots, emails, call transcripts, and briefing notes from the days leading up to the Fortune Summit. By morning, the world would see that what happened on stage hadn't been spontaneous. It had been brewing. The calm before the break. That night, while Meghan sat in her hotel suite replaying clips of herself correcting Alyson, editors at the Post were piecing together a story. One of Fortune's junior staffers, uneasy about the way Meghan's team had treated everyone, had decided to leak everything. The emails were damning, not scandalous in a criminal sense, but revealing in tone. Meghan's PR handler had written, "Please confirm that Alyson will address her as Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex." This title must be used consistently throughout the event. And Fortune's polite response: "We don't use honorifics or titles in our sessions. Our standard practice is first name only," followed by a curt reply from Meghan's aide. This is not a negotiable point. The paper trail showed days of back and forth, each message growing icier. Fortune stayed firm.